An open hearing on House Bill 3546. Aaron, please.
Chair Lively, Vice Chairs, and members of the committee, House Bill 3546 requires the Oregon Public Utility Commission to provide for a classification of service for large energy use facilities that use 20 megawatts or more.
Very good. Representative Marsh and Senator Solomon, welcome.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair Lively, Vice Chairs Gamba and Levy, and members of the committee. For the record, I'm still Pam Marsh, State Representative from District 5, Southern Jackson County. A prevailing theme of this legislative session is the need to help consumers cope with the increasing and often overwhelming cost of living. Today's legislation, House Bill 3546, also known as the Power Act, ensures that electricity utility ratepayers already overloaded with growing costs due to wildfire mitigation, erratic weather events, and inflation are not also saddled with costs attributed to new large users that are putting enormous strain on the system. Traditionally, growth in energy demand was relatively balanced across all users, justifying roughly equal distribution of costs. But the explosion of huge technology facilities has upended that traditional metric. For example, since 2019, data center growth in PGE territory has been equivalent to an increase of 400,000 residential customers. But residential demand has grown by only 63,000 people or 24,000 customer accounts. Without intervention, the costs created by the disproportionate demand of big energy users will be borne by residential consumers who are already struggling.
Okay.
House Bill 3546 is a simple and straightforward bill to right that ship and ensure that large energy users pay their own way. To be very clear, we aren't asking them to subsidize other users, and we aren't challenging in any way the tax benefits that are often associated with development. We just want them to pay their own bills. The bill proposes two changes to the way we structure regulated electricity billing in our state's IOU territories. First, the bill institutes a large energy user rate classification that applies to entities using more than 20 megawatts of energy and that provide services described in Code 518210 of the North American Industry Classification System, also known as NAICS. That NAICS code includes data centers and crypto mining operations, although we don't yet have any or many crypto mining facilities in the state. Large energy users in the new classification, that is data centers and crypto mining, will be assigned the proportional costs incurred to serve the class. Costs will include transmission, distribution, energy and capacity, and any related costs required to serve these customers. Second, HB 3546 requires that new facilities sign a 10-year contract that commits them to pay a minimum amount for energy that will be provided. New facilities, for example, substations, will be in place for decades. If a utility is going to make investments to serve a large user, we need some assurances that those investments do not become a stranded asset that is essentially shifted to other ratepayers. You may hear representatives from data centers ask why they are being singled out from other large energy users in this legislation. You will hear more about the why there from Bob Jinks in a moment. But the short answer is that data centers have a specific massive impact on the grid that simply is not characteristic of other large users. As a technology consumer, I am well aware that every time I open my laptop or text something on my phone or flirt with the idea that maybe someday I'll figure out how to use AI, I'm benefiting from a data center somewhere. I should and will undoubtedly pay for those services in my role as a tech consumer. That's appropriate. But the energy costs incurred in selling technology services should be part of the calculation of running that business, not foisted onto utility ratepayers who are struggling to pay their own bills. Thank you so much for the opportunity to present House Bill 3546 today. I would just note our committee colleague, Rep. Owens, has a conflict upstairs and was not able to testify today, but he joins as a co-chief in this legislation. Wanted to convey that what we are proposing here is what he experiences as a customer of a cooperative utility.
Very good. Thank you. Welcome.
Chair Lively, Vice Chairs, and members of the committee, for the record, I'm Janine Solomon. I am the state senator for Senate District 15, and that includes areas of Forest Grove, Cornelius, Hillsborough, and the Rock Creek area of Western Washington County. I'm really honored and happy to be here to support my colleague and support such a great policy in H. Bill 3546. Thank you for this opportunity. This is a bill that addresses the critical use and issue of large energy use facilities and their impact on the state's energy infrastructure. I believe this bill is an important step forward, ensuring that our electricity grid remains reliable, resilient, and cost-effective for all Oregonians. Large energy use facilities have the potential to place significant strain on the grid, especially in regions where energy capacity is already stretched thin. House Bill 3546 directs the Public Utility Commission to establish a separate class of service for large energy facilities, those that use 20 megawatts or more of electricity. By creating a separate classification for these large facilities, the bill ensures that the cost of serving them are assigned fairly. This means that those facilities will contribute to the cost of transmission, distribution, energy, and capacity, mitigating the financial burden that would otherwise fall on other retail electricity consumers. This measure not only shields smaller consumers from disproportionate costs, that it creates a system where large energy users are held accountable for the infrastructure required to meet their needs, rather than passing the costs on to the general public. I had the opportunity to travel to Denmark in 2023 on an educational fact-finding trip to learn about the country's energy technology, resilience, and efficiency. One of our tours was to a green and circular industrial park called Skive Green Lab, where they placed industries in close proximity to varied energy production technologies and to not rely on costly transmission lines to serve those high energy needs of those particular industries, all together in an industrial park. This is innovation. Denmark is a global leader. Data centers play an important role in supporting our growing technology needs in the United States. We must be forward-thinking and work towards a system that is both fair and equitable for Oregonians and our future. Colleagues, I urge your support of House Bill 3546. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Representative Osborne.
Thank you, Chair Lively. I too was on that trip to Denmark, and thank you for that point, which leads me kind of into another question. With Oregon's current zoning laws, land use laws, I don't know that we could ever mimic what was done in Denmark, and we should, because it really works in Denmark. But my bigger question is, I've watched the state of Nevada. Just recently I went on a trip down there, and I've watched the area around Reno just blow up with businesses and data centers and just everything else. And I'm wondering, have you guys reached out to any other states to see what their policy is on this? And my reason for asking that is because my concern is we're going to put more burden on business, and the state's already in trouble. We need more business. I realize these businesses don't supply a ton of jobs, but they do supply a lot of jobs when they're in the process of building them. And I don't want to discourage people from coming here, organizations, companies from coming here. So I'm just wondering if you've engaged, are there any other states that are doing this way?
Chair Lively, Rep. Osborne, great question. This is an issue all over the country because we are seeing data centers simply blow up in energy systems in many places. Everybody's trying to figure out what to do. Virginia, I think, had 10 bills introduced to try to address data center issues. I don't know that any of them are actually moving forward, but this discussion has happened in many different places. In terms of what does it do to our competitiveness, I would just note what we are addressing here is simply the fair cost of energy so that energy costs aren't transferred onto someone else. Again, we're not challenging the tax benefits. I would argue that economic development is most appropriately provided through specific tax benefits, local land decision-making, as opposed to having residential energy payers subsidize energy costs. That just seems like an inappropriate way to invite a data center to set up shop here.
Representative Levy.
I too went on that trip with Senator Solomon. We had a blast. We learned a lot. It was very tiring. And So I have a question. I believe, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that this bill was based upon the way Amazon and Umatilla Electric in my district do their business together. And then I have a further clarification if that is the case.
Chair Lively, Representative Levy, yes. We looked a lot for a variety of reasons at what was going on in Umatilla. I visited there last summer. And what we're trying to do here is simply replicate in IOU territory what is already happening in COU territory. And with our co-ops, our consumer-owned utilities, because they are not regulated, they have the ability to negotiate with a data center that's coming in to make sure that their customers, who are also their neighbors, are not going to bear the costs of that data center. That would be simply incomprehensible with our small utilities that care a lot about their direct customer relationships. I would note that Rep. Owens also said to me that he is required, if he has an extension of services with his electric co-op, to sign a contract stating that he will continue to pay for those services for a given amount of time. We want to make sure if a utility is investing that the customer exists for a while to justify the expense, so the expense isn't transferred on to other customers. So I would say in summary, our IOU territory has a lot to learn from the COUs who are able to be a little bit more lithe and flexible because they are not regulated.
Thank you very much. And I also am under the same guidelines with irrigated farming that Rep. Owens is. And yes, we have to do the same thing with our COU. So
Yep.
Thank you very much for that clarification. I would ask that I think that the fear among other data centers that this is to try, and I'm not speaking for any one data center in particular, but I would think that because they have not been part of this conversation, that we might bring them into this conversation so that they have a seat at the table and they can understand what you're meaning so as not to stop economic development in other counties or other areas that other data centers might be privy to or might be part with, because I know in my district it's Amazon, in somebody else's district it's Meta, and somebody else's district it's Google, and they're all trying to do economic development as well and that kind of stuff. And so I don't know where they were brought in this conversation, if at all, but if not, is there a way you can have conversations with them so that it becomes something that the people are more willing to do? Thank you.
Chair Lively, Vice Chair Levy, thank you so much for that. And I think that as we're talking about the economic development, I think you just made that comment very clear in that we have an area here in Oregon that is so wanted and needed by data centers. And I think that this is such an important piece of legislation because we do need to come ahead of this and really stop, because the ripple effect isn't just, we're not just talking about you and me and our energy bills. It also is those small businesses. It's the daycares. It's everyone else that is impacted by high energy costs. And simply this bill, I will just reiterate with my colleague, Rep. Marsh, saying that this bill doesn't touch on the tax issue, the tax incentives and things like that. But what's really important is let's kind of think a little bit out of the box. Why we can't have a green lab here potentially right now in Oregon. This is a green lab ISK, right? ISK, whatever it is, yeah. It is, it's important for us to look at those high energy users and figure out how can we have them directly connect with their needs for energy, but not have the ripple effect as Denmark did. They placed them all together so they didn't have to do the transmission lines. They didn't have to cross across farmland and everything else. But this is just about making sure that if you're a high energy user, you're going to take part in this, in the infrastructure needs, so the ripple effect across the community is felt less.
But you still didn't answer my question.
Oh,
And my question was, are you going to bring the other Amazon, Google, Meta into the conversation so that they do not feel like they're being singled out or being put aside and don't have a voice in what's going on?
Chair Lively, Vice Chair Levy, absolutely, we're happy to talk to anybody. There have been conversations that have gone on between people who have been developing this legislation and the data centers. I'm sure data centers will still have something to say here. But I think I want to emphasize two things. Number one is I want to make clear that the bill affects IOU territory. So the COUs, the data centers that are in other parts of the state are unaffected by this. We're going to let them continue to do negotiation on their own. Secondly, simply to emphasize that we value the data centers. They are important parts of our community. We are all consuming the technology they're providing like crazy on a regular basis. And we need to also protect consumers and make sure that the utility structure we're all a part of has fairness for individuals.
Thank you very much.
Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Chair. First thing I want to say is I wish I would have gone on this Denmark trip. It sounds like you learned a whole lot.
Good trip.
Yeah. Second thing is more of a comment, but I look at this and I say we're talking about investor-owned utilities that are investors want to get a profit, and most of the magnitude of what the other people who are involved, homeowners, small business owners, the order of magnitude between the amount of electricity and energy they use is totally different than the other magnitude of what the big businesses use. So I think this is a great bill, and thanks for bringing it.
Representative Osborne.
Thank you, Chair Lively. It's going to be a little bit of a reach question, but I'm going to ask it because you were in Denmark too and you saw this. In Denmark, they do produce power in the green, I can't remember whatever you call it, Green Lab. And that power goes directly to those data centers that are close by. In the United States, I think I just heard last week or week before last, there was a data center, I can't remember what company it was, that's firing off an old natural gas power plant to produce their own power to power their own data center. Is the intention here or the possible unintended consequences that we actually have the data centers that move here, they do produce their own power, then they become not part of our grid? Have you thought about the upside potential and the downside potential of that? I mean, if we raise the price so high for them to move here that it makes sense for them to go after federal funding to produce their own power, what are we going to have? Are we going to have thousands of acres of solar panels and thousands of acres of windmills to produce the power to generate one Google?
Chair Lively, Rep. Osborne, a couple of thoughts. Number one, I don't think you're going to see significant changes in a data center's power bills. Those changes on the basis of residents could be significant, but I don't think you're going to see an overwhelming impact on data centers. And it'll all be based on data. So the PUC will look at all the costs and attribute it to the class so that there's nothing in the burden that's being placed on data centers that isn't directly attributable to their use of energy and their requirement for energy. We also want data centers to be looking at independent sources of energy. You may have read that, in fact, we talked about it in this committee, Amazon is looking at doing small cell nuclear in Washington and bringing it in to support Amazon. We do not want to stand in the way of independent contractors working with those utilities, although the big utilities might have something to say about that. I think there's plenty of power need to go around here.
Just follow up real quick. And that's what I'm getting at, right? And we all saw that hydrogen plant at the Green Lab, and it has plenty of power to do whatever they want to do, and it's not very big. So it's a real potential that could happen. So just my thought.
Innovation.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Representative Helm.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And this might be a question for maybe Bob or other folks is, for us to understand better, there are a number of different conditions that our data center businesses are looking for. Low rates are not necessarily the top of the list as I understand it. And the reason that they are coming to places like the Port of Morrow is there's a friendly business environment there, in addition to the ability to hook up to the grid in a place where it is very complex and capable of bringing in energy and sending out energy. So I don't know that that's a question for you, but I wanted to throw it out there for the next folks testifying.
Chair Lively and Rep. Helm, and I would add water to that list, and we have sufficient water here. Tremendously important to the locational decision-making.
Very good. Any further questions? Doesn't look like it. Thank you both for your testimony.
Thank you.
Next, I'll call up Bob Jenks, Cole Souter, and Jeremy Fisher. No, Jeremy's. Welcome.
Chair Lively, Vice Chairs Levy and Gamba, thank you for this opportunity to testify in this important bill. My name is Bob Jenks. I'm Executive Director of the Citizens Utility Board, or CUB. I want to thank Representative Marsh, Representative Owens, and Senator Solomon for their leadership on this issue. To show my appreciation to Representative March, I'm going to reference Ashland at least 4 times this morning. We represent residential customers and try to keep rates affordable, accessible, and clean. I agree with the conversation that this bill is really about investor-owned utilities. The publicly owned utilities that are served by Bonneville are not affected by it. Bonneville, the BPA limits new large loads access to federal hydropower. And so most publicly owned utilities, or all that I know of, segregate data center load and don't subsidize it. The problem we're addressing here is primarily PG&E and PacifiCorp, where some of the costs to serve data centers are spread across all customers. While most of my slides are going to focus on PG&E, that's simply because that's where I have the data. This is an issue for both PG&E and PacifiCorp, and both have a fair amount of data center load and have more coming. This slide shows the dramatic growth in data center load on PGE's system. It was essentially non-existent 10 years ago and is more than 1 million megawatt hours today. Over the last 10 years, PGE's load would have shrunk if it wasn't for the growth of this new large load. There have been growth in other customer classes, but it's been fully offset by energy efficiency investments. Historically, we've never seen a period where all the growth on a utility system was confined to a single customer group. It should be noted that this line gets steeper over time, and it's going to get even steeper as we go forward. So far, Oregon has been getting data centers that focus on things like cloud computing. And these data centers are essentially a little bit bigger than the electric load of the city of Ashland. That's the first time. But as the AI data centers that are coming are larger than the load of the city of Eugene. Think about what the infrastructure would take to accommodate a new Ashland, or 5 Ashlands, or 15 Ashlands over the next 2 or 3 years. The roads, the sewers, the water. Think about trying to accommodate a couple new Eugenes that suddenly appear. That's what the electric system faces, except it is not roads to move cars. It's transmission to move electrons, it's new power supply, and new battery storage. And it comes on quickly. Meeting the loads of the data centers is going to be expensive. Data centers are unique to the grid. As I said, we've never seen anything like the growth of the data centers over the last 10 years, where a single customer group represents all the growth on the system. It's unprecedented size. It's an incredibly inflexible load. Essentially, each data center runs at its peak or near its peak 24 hours a day, 365 days per year. They can be built quickly, as much as 18 months to 2 years. And it's not just the size, but the number of data centers that are coming. We're close to the cable that runs under the Pacific. And that, along with tax breaks, no sales tax, has made Oregon a very attractive place for data centers. And never have we seen a set of customers bring this amount of costs to the electric system this quickly. This is a unique challenge, and it's not just in Oregon. We see newspaper articles from all around the country about the dramatic growth in data centers. This is something we've never seen before, and the U.S. has never seen before. part of the solution is a data center rate class. We need a data center rate class because data centers are a unique set of customers that are putting a unique and significant cost on the electric system. It's important to recognize that this is how costs are assigned in utility rate making. First, we identify how much a utility needs in revenue from its customers. Then we assign the cost to customer classes. We cannot assign the costs that are incurred to serve data center loads to them without a data center rate class. This is not unusual. Rate classes are based on, there are rate classes based on in usage. Irrigators and street lighting, for example, have their own rate classes because using electricity for irrigation and street lighting puts unique costs on the system. PGE has incurred $210 million in local transmission upgrades to serve data centers in Washington County. And those costs are assigned to all classes of customers currently. It makes no sense to us to have customers who are paying 19 cents a kilowatt hour subsidizing customers who are paying 8 cents a kilowatt hour. You'll hear the data centers say they don't want to be subsidized. They want to pay their share of costs. But it's important to understand that having a data center rate class is the tool that allows us to assign costs to the data centers. We've been talking to them. They also participate at the PUC in rate cases. And the PUC, I have no doubt, will look at costs and assign costs fairly. This bill is really very simple. It doesn't assign any cost to data centers. It simply creates a tool so that the Public Utility Commission can assign to data centers the costs that are incurred to serve their load. And I'm happy to answer questions from folks.
Thank you, Bob. Cole?
Good morning, and thank you, Chair Lively, Vice Chairs Gamba and Levy, and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Cole Souder, and I'm a staff attorney at the Green Energy Institute at Lewis and Clark Law School, testifying in support of House Bill 3546. GEI routinely engages in front of the Oregon Public Utility Commission, advocating for comprehensive and equitable policies that result in clean, high-quality, and affordable energy. The Public Utility Commission recently stated the data center's sheer scale presents unique risks to a utility's other customers. Data centers' significant additions to the amount of power utilities must provide strains the system upon which everyone relies. A utility often needs to build facilities designed specifically to serve a data center before it can connect to the grid. The utility often must also build and upgrade transmission resources to maintain the reliability of the grid. And because data centers use energy equivalent to tens of thousands of customers, fluctuations in their usage require utilities to compensate rapidly in ways that incur additional costs. Absent adequate protections, these costs, incurred solely to serve new and existing data centers, are spread to all of the utility's customers. House Bill 3536 is an attempt to solve this problem of inequitable cost shifting by pursuing two interconnected goals: procedural certainty and substantive fairness. House Bill 3546 provides procedural certainty by declaring data centers over 20 megawatts to be their own customer class and granting the Public Utility Commission the power to proactively regulate that class. The need for House Bill 3546 was apparent on Tuesday when the PUC considered a proposal by PGE to address some of the risks associated with new data centers. Stakeholders and PUC staff had pointed out that PGE's proposal failed to adequately protect customers from the cost-based risks data centers present, despite the fact that PGE had received a series of extensions that delayed the proceeding nearly a year. But because of the nature of the procedural rules, the PUC was largely unable to force PGE to implement a more protective policy without exposing customers to even greater risks in the short term. Somewhat absurdly, the PUC was forced to protect customers by delaying the proceedings even further. A different set of limited protections were approved for PacifiCorp customers in its most recent rate case, an entirely different procedural track than the one being utilized by PGE. This means that under the current system, otherwise identical customers are exposed to entirely different risk profiles, constituting both a difference of degree and a difference of kind, dependent solely on which utility's territory in which they happen to work and live. House Bill 3546 would allow the PUC to regain control of the regulatory space and establish sound policies that apply to all investor-owned utilities. The remainder of House Bill 3546 delivers substantive fairness for electric customers by requiring that data centers be assigned the costs they cause a utility to incur, including costs for transportation, distribution, energy, capacity, and related costs, as well as the costs incurred to respond to the fluctuations in a data center's demand. House Bill 3546 will help ensure that other utility customers are not forced to bear the burden of when a new data center is built in their backyard. These data centers are not mom and pop shops. They're run by the largest, richest corporations in the world, companies that can afford to pay their fair share of the costs they impose on Oregon's grid. Thus, House Bill 3546 protects customers against unaffordable energy in the future by ensuring they are not exposed to the cost-based risks unique to data centers. Thank you.
Thank you. Jeremy Fisher.
Good morning, Chair Lively and members of the committee, and thank you for having me this morning. My name is Jeremy Fisher, and I am the Principal Advisor for Climate and Energy at Sierra Club, the nation's largest grassroots environmental organization with 55,000 members and supporters in Oregon. Sierra Club regularly intervenes in public utility dockets throughout the United States to protect customers and public health. Today, I'm here in support of House Bill 3546, which provides regulators a critical set of tools. Over the last 2 years, Sierra Club has been closely tracking utilities nationally that introduce large new loads like data centers and the impact that they're having on both customers and emissions. At the end of last year, I co-authored a paper called Demanding Better, which helps technology companies and regulators mitigate their impacts on electricity systems. Today, we're tracking 23 states that are on their way to having a gigawatt or more of data centers by 2030, and Oregon's estimated 4 gigawatts by 2030 is no exception to this startling growth. Today's data centers are an entirely new class of customer, building at scales unimaginable just a few years ago. The individual clusters of data centers that are seeking to move into utility territories are climbing into the gigawatt scale, becoming sizable fractions of utilities' loads. As an outcome, utilities and their incumbent customers are increasingly exposed to the needs of singular and highly concentrated customers, a pattern which departs greatly from traditional load growth. We're observing several impactful outcomes from this projected growth. First, when load growth outpaces our ability to add new generation, the marginal cost of energy increases for all customers. In much of the United States, the higher cost generation also bears higher emissions. We conducted a rigorous assessment of what data center growth in Virginia, Ohio, and Illinois meant for PJM in the East, and our modelers found that the need for energy rose rapidly with the influx of new data centers, increasing overall energy system costs by 30% and driving up residential bills by 10% or more over the entire 13-state region. Only tariffs that fairly allocate incremental costs to new large loads provide protection for residential ratepayers. Second, high concentrations of new load require investments in transmission infrastructure, a cost which has historically been socialized across all customer classes. Today, for example, Virginia is grappling with no fewer than 9 active dockets seeking to certify new transmission for data centers, with the costs allocated to all customers across the zone. Finally, the industry remains unclear about the trajectory of data center growth, but continues to inject what we perceive as largely speculative capital. Our assessments show that nearly 25% of data center growth is being proposed by companies with few, if any, substantial data centers under their belt, leaving utilities at risk of stranded assets. Several states today are already leading in proposals to insulate customers from system costs imposed by large new loads and data centers, including tariffs that assign new infrastructure costs to new large load customers, require minimum term contracts, minimum demand charges, and financial assurances or bonds. And states like Nevada are in the process of creating novel tariff structures that will allow technology companies to invest in new local clean energy and incentivize on-site storage to reduce system strain and fuel cost exposure. Oregon's House Bill 3546 ensures that regulators have the tools that they require to structure large load tariffs, protect incumbent and low-income customers, and protect the state's energy goals. And I urge you to support it. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much. Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Chair Lively. I think this question is for Mr. Jenks, but I'd be happy if anybody else wants to answer it too. BPA supplies power to other states other than Oregon. I'm wondering, how is this a different rate class? Is it used in other BPA supplied power places where BPA supplies power?
Chair Lively, Rep. Anderson, yes, BPA throughout its system doesn't allow new large loads access to the federal hydro system. They got tier 1 and tier 2, and so they have to come in at market costs. And because public power is almost all elected officials, they could blend those rates and make everyone pay the higher cost of the data centers. But an elected local board is pretty unlikely to do that. So I don't know anywhere where an elected board has said we're going to ask everyone to subsidize the costs of the new data centers, but it's possible out there.
Okay, thanks.
Representative Gamba.
Thank you, Chair. I applaud this concept. I've long felt that industry underpaid for their electricity, which was creating a perverse incentive for them not to invest in cheaper renewables. The curiosity I have is that given the certain, or the moment we're in nationally with the tariffs that are meant to drive manufacturing back to America, and that advanced manufacturing, as I understand it, also creates loads similar to data center growth or data center loads. Why are we limiting this bill only to data centers and crypto mining as opposed to just the loads like advanced manufacturing that will hit in the same kind of categories?
Chair Lively, Rep. Gamba, from our viewpoint, this really is an issue of data centers currently and potentially crypto mining. Those are the ones that are in these kinds of numbers. There's theoretically other manufacturers that could come here. But if you look at a manufacturer like Intel has a large load, but Intel began when I was in high school in Aloha. I lived just down the street from Intel's first manufacturing plant in Oregon, and that was in the 70s. What you have is a much longer lead time for advanced manufacturing. A data center just builds a building and puts a bunch of computers into it, and it can go up really, really quickly. So I'm not sure there's anything that has that ability that would come to Oregon. It takes time. It takes years of planning for most advanced manufacturing. And so if that happens, we can always try to address those issues. But right now, it's the data centers that are putting these costs on the system, and we want to make sure that we can assign the cost to them.
If I'm
Sorry. Go ahead.
If I may, in addition to what Mr. Jenks just said, and thank you so much, one of the features that we see in association with data centers, in addition to being able to come online quite quickly, is that there's disclarity about how long the investments that they're making in that infrastructure will actually persist on the system. So large technology manufacturers are making substantial investments that are on the order of multi-decadal investments in the system. And so we have some element of an assurance that they're going to be with the system, and the threat of stranded asset recovery is much lower. The both ramp rate of data centers and the potential that they disappear off of the system, particularly with elements like crypto mining, is much more acute.
Okay, thanks. That half answers my follow-up question. So we know that we're going to need significant transmission, new transmission build out over the next handful of decades, which we don't have much of an answer to at this moment. And that's going to be driven by whether it's a longer term project or not, it's still going to require the new facilities, the new very expensive transmission facilities to be built. I mean, I've always believed that growth should pay for growth, period. And it just feels like we're not quite hitting it, is all I'm getting at. So.
Right, Chair Lively, Representative Gamba, I think you're exactly right. And first, I want to thank you for your leadership on transmission issues here with several bills and the work that you're doing. Transmission is expensive. It's going to take a while to build it. And currently, the way we allocate transmission costs is there are shared costs among all customer classes and customers that have been on the system for many, many years pay for new transmission, even though new transmission isn't needed for their particular loads. So that's one of the things that this bill will allow. It will allow the commission to say if again, and it has to be, this is a fact-based system. It's not, we want to assign all these costs to data centers because they have a lot of money. It's if the PUC can look at this cost and say this cost was caused, this incremental cost was caused by this load, then this gives them the ability to assign those costs on there. But there has to be that connection. It has to be fact-based. Commission decisions can be appealed to the courts. This is not going to be just let's throw all the costs on data centers and the heck with it. This is really the PUC doesn't work that way. Rate cases are difficult. They take a lot of time. They take a lot of evidence. But we do think that the incremental cost of growth ought to go on to that incremental growth.
Great, thank you.
Representative Emerson Levy.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to kind of get us back on track a little bit. What I heard the Rep. Marsh and Senator Solomon say is, we're not saying data centers are bad. We're not making value judgments about data centers. For my district, it's been a big economic driver, not a fly-by-night operation by any means, but that we need to prepare for the large growth. And so I just want to get us back on track. And also to ask Mr. Jinks, so my understanding is a lot of the data centers are already in compliance with what you're suggesting, that they're not adding costs, that they pay for their own costs. Is there an example of data centers not covering their own cost?
Chair Lively, Representative Levy, yes, as I mentioned, in Hillsborough, we've seen $210 million of transmission upgrades that PGE has identified as specifically to support data center growth, and that's been socialized among all customer classes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Osborne.
Thanks, Chair. Before we overregulate our business, I just saw the revenue report for Oregon, and it's not looking that great. Our industry, our manufacturing is basically going away to other states because we overregulate the holy heck out of our business. Before we do this again, has anybody talked to the data centers to see how they feel about where we're at with this thing? I mean, just because we think it's a good idea doesn't mean it's a good idea.
Chair Lively, Representative Osborne, I've talked to several of the data centers. The data centers we've had many conversations. They also participate at the PUC in these rate-making dockets. The Data Center Coalition has been advocating for them there. They are at the table. They will speak for themselves. I'll be honest, I don't think most of them agree with the bill. I think some of them are neutral, some may oppose it. But again, to me, this is a step in the right direction. This is a necessary step to be able to correctly assign costs, and we'll continue to talk with the data centers. Ultimately, the data centers represent people with a lot of money. They're rich corporations. If we're going to build the energy system we need to support this, we're going to need their help. We're going to need their support, and we would love to see them bring some innovative ideas to the table and help us build that supply, help us build that transmission, help us develop the resources and stuff we need to do it. So, but none of that is, to me, this is a fairly simple little bill that says let's create a rate class that allows us to assign costs. And in that manner, I don't think it's. I think their concerns are maybe overblown, but we do want to keep talking to data centers, and we do want to work with them. And nobody's trying to demonize them with this bill.
Can I add on?
Just a quick follow-up. Frankly, it does sound like we're trying to demonize them a little bit. And now I've heard the conversation about bringing in other manufacturing into this. I would just caution, let's not throw out the baby with the bathwater. They can certainly say, no, we're going to go to a different state. And frankly, if I was going to start a business of size in another state, in any state, Oregon would be really low on my list right now because of our regulations. So,
But we do have one of the data centers going to testify anyway.
Good.
So
Can I add to what Bob said on that last point? Chair Lively and Representative Osborne, this bill doesn't just protect residential customers, but it also protects commercial customers and it protects other industrial customers. So, for example, PGE's current proposal that they have in front of the PUC lumps together, is an attempt to protect customers from data centers, but in doing so is forced to lump other large load customers into the set of protections that we hope this bill will provide for data centers specifically. So there are lots of other Oregon businesses, specifically Oregon smaller businesses, that will receive the protections in this bill and will help them avoid being burdened with higher energy costs in the future. So, we are siphoning off, or this bill does siphon off data centers, but the protections that it provides goes to a much larger swath of Oregon businesses.
Sorry, I'm going to have to follow up with that. Frankly, we just heard another bill in a different committee that basically is shifting electric costs over. It will eventually shift those costs back onto not only the power companies, but business. Business is going to pay the brunt of all of this and all of these bills and all of this stuff that we're talking about. If we make business so hard to do here, we're not going to have business. And frankly, we could use the manufacturing here in Oregon. So I understand we need to take care of the citizens and we need to take care of our constituents and they need to have decent prices on electricity. But the reason they have jobs is because of those businesses that come here and hire them. So I'm really concerned about the unintended consequences, which is what this building likes to do. So thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for your testimony. Next, I'm going to call up Dylan Sullivan and Alan Zuckerman and Dylan Sullivan. Please introduce yourself for the record and make your comments known.
Good morning. Can you hear me? Chair Lively, Vice Chairs, members of the committee. My name is Ellen Zuckerman. I am Head of Energy Market Development for the Americas for Google, and I'm joined today by my colleague Dylan Sullivan.
For the record, I'm Dylan Sullivan, and I work on energy market development in the West for Google. Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you. So first of all, I just want to say we're actually really welcoming the conversation that's here today. We think it's a very important conversation that's not only happening in Oregon, but in many jurisdictions across the country. And I was forced, when signing up to testify, to pick from buckets of support, oppose, neutral. I want to say that we're here today because we really want to work with you on this bill and are here as collaborators. We believe that the opportunity for load growth presents incredible economic advantages for the state. It also presents challenges, and we really want to work with you all and meet the moment on a solution that's everlasting and can really capitalize on Google as a catalyst to help us collectively invest in our power system. I mentioned I am Head of Energy Market Development for Google in the Americas. I joined Google about 3 years ago. Before that, I worked in half the states on climate and clean energy policy in a number of capacities: local government, state government, clean energy advocacy organizations, and major philanthropies. I came to Google because Google has the most ambitious corporate commitment to climate in the world. We have a commitment to power our operations around the clock with 24/7 carbon-free electricity by 2030. What that means is that for every facility that we operate, in every grid that we operate, we work with our utility partners, we work with stakeholders, so that those operations, those facilities, are powered by carbon-free electricity. Importantly, that goal applies to our presence here in Oregon. So if you're not familiar, we have 3 data centers in the Dalles. Our very first one opened up in 2006. In the last year and a half, we've broken ground on a new data center as well. It's actually the most energy efficient data center in our entire fleet. This goal also applies to our office building. We have a major office in Portland. It's the office that I work out of. And again, this goal sets us up and is very intentional about making sure that Google works with the decision makers, with the stakeholders in the community where it's present, to enable carbon-free electricity. As I mentioned, I'm here today because this is a really important conversation that you all are having. It's one that you are not alone in having. And as Mr. Jenks mentioned, over the last 2 decades, this country has experienced relatively flat load growth. Also, we've critically underinvested in our infrastructure, including our power infrastructure. This new load growth that's coming onto the system, of which data centers are one component, represents incredible opportunity. It is a reflection that we need to invest in our digital infrastructure, which critical sectors of the economy rely on. But it also presents challenges because we have underinvested for more than 20 years. I'm really proud to say that we have been at the forefront on this conversation. In 4 states now, we have been able to strike unanimous agreement with consumer advocates, with utilities, with environmental groups, other large loads, and the professional staff at regulatory commissions to come up with a framework that we think should be successfully implemented elsewhere. And actually, one of the charges of my team is to proactively go out there and get it adopted because we think it's the right thing to do. This framework is composed of a couple of key pillars. First of all, it requires all new large loads to sign long-term contractual agreements with their utilities in the form of agreements that are 8 to 12 years, so that utilities know that the new loads coming onto their system are committed. The second thing it does is it commits those new large loads to paying significant minimum infrastructure charges. That essentially de-risks the investment in the utility system that they need to make. The third thing is that those new large loads need to back up their load requests with significant collateral so that were they to leave, the utilities have confidence that money is still coming in the door and that other ratepayers are not left holding the bag. Again, we've been able to now get this in place in a number of jurisdictions, and we are very open and want to see a similar model adopted here. We think it sends a really important signal. We think it sends a signal to our utility partners that we are here to stay, but also that we are here to de-risk the investments that they have to make. Critically, as we have negotiated these comprehensive agreements, we have also worked with utilities to ensure that there are components so that when they are making these de-risked investments, they are taking advantage of the full suite of cutting-edge clean energy technologies. So, for example, in Indiana, we received a commitment from our utility partner there to design the new tariff, the one that Mr. Fisher from the Sierra Club just presented on, and that our company is responsible for proposing in Nevada. They've also committed to doing proactive studies on the deployment of grid-enhancing technologies, which are technologies that you can put on the transmission system today to free up capacity. Similarly, in Arizona, our utility partner there committed to developing a virtual power plant program. We think it's really important as these new large loads show up and de-risk the system that utilities in kind are also taking steps to make sure that the investments that they're making are in the best interest of all ratepayers. When we take a step back and reflect on the bill that's before you today, we think that there are many elements that are to like. We also think that there is need for improvement, and we welcome what we've heard today, that the bill sponsors and other stakeholders would welcome us at the table because we think we have really important contributions and perspective to provide. Critically, a few things that are missing that we see from the bill is one, that it's not universally applicable to new large loads. We think that's really critical because we are responding otherwise to a moment in time. What we really want to do is set up a framework that positions Oregon for success over the long haul. And by focusing on one industry and not all of the drivers of new large load growth, we are not doing that. We're also setting up some precedent that we think is very concerning, which I'm happy to talk about later. In addition, there are no requirements in the bill around collateral. As we have had these conversations in multiple states with regulators, with utilities, with other stakeholders, the collateral component we've learned is absolutely critical. And then finally, as I mentioned earlier, if we are going forward with this model where we are essentially asking new large loads to help de-risk the utility system investment, we think it's really critical that we seize the moment to provide additional pathways and opportunities to accelerate clean, firm technologies. And right now, those components are absent from the bill, so it's really a half package. I'll just close and say that we are here today because we really want to work with you. We want to show up as a grid citizen in Oregon. We want to use our capital to help accelerate and achieve Oregon's goals. And we want a framework where we are in a posture of collaboration, not in an adversarial posture. So again, really welcome the opportunity for this conversation. Looking forward for additional exchange on this because we really want to work with you to get this right. Thank you.
Please.
Chair Lively, I'm here mainly to answer questions.
No, thank you. Thank you very much. Representative Anderson.
Thank you very much. And thank you for showing up today. I'm interested in the third prong where twice you've talked about collateral, and there's nothing about collateral in this bill, but what do you mean when you say collateral? I mean, I know what I think about when I'm talking about collateral. It's something for a loan or something else. So to me, this situation, you're talking about collateral if for some reason a data center or Google or somebody else decides to leave the state. Is that understanding correct?
Chair Lively, Rep. Anderson, thank you for that question. I'll make a few comments and then my colleague Dylan Sullivan may have some specifics to share as well. So I would say that in the states where we have been able to negotiate this universal agreement, the collateral has taken several different forms, but essentially it is designed to ensure that if a new large load says that it's showing up and were it to leave the system, there is a stream of funding that will continue to go in to pay for the infrastructure investments that were developed.
Chair Lively, Representative Anderson, generally the collateral requirements are in the, my colleague Ellen mentioned minimum payments. So, each year, given the capacity that you have on the system, you have to make a minimum payment to your utility to reflect the new infrastructure that was built to serve you. The way the collateral requirements have worked is generally multiple years of minimum payments have to be posted as a letter of credit or a parent company guarantee. So in the case, that someone was to leave, the utility has that security and can pay for those incremental investments.
Follow up, please. So you talked about a stream of funding, but I think your companion here has said the stream of funding is coming from the utility or the data center that is leaving the state. So in other words, if you're here, you put money in, so when you leave, that money you put in can somehow help the situation for our state after you leave?
Chair Lively, Representative Anderson, one thing I would just note is when we invest in a data center community, we are here for the long haul. So hopefully the credit provisions never need to come to pass. But we do want to ensure that in this new era of load growth, that our utility partners, were that load not to materialize, that they have the confidence that there is dollars backing it, so that if they make investments, there is collateral behind it.
One more follow-up, please.
Quickly, we've got
Yeah, so this is a simple yes or no question. The money for the stream of funding is coming from you.
Correct.
Thank you.
Yes.
Representative Bobby.
Thanks, Chair. I just want to thank you for coming and testifying. And I really want to thank Representative Marsh for saying that everybody is welcome at the table, and she would welcome the conversation from all of the data centers, Amazon, Google, Meta, or anybody else that wants to come and sit at the table and have a conversation. I look forward to further conversations on this bill since it's modeled after what's going on in my district. And I would say that we do it very well, but we have great partners. And that's what really helps. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your testimony. Oh, excuse me. Representative Neron.
Okay, far
Sorry,
away.
my vision was,
Thank you, Chair. And I want to just appreciate all of the testimony that we've heard. It's been really fascinating today. And I just want to acknowledge and thank Google for coming to share some, the intention to collaborate and your commitment to, climate, clean energy goals, carbon neutral goals. I appreciate that. And that you've come today is significant. So I really just want to make sure that we call that out, that you've come here today to talk with us and that you want to work with Oregon. Just a quick question, I think, is you keep, and others have mentioned other large loads and this energy or the era of load growth. I am not able to come up with some of these other large loads on my own. Can we just get a quick list of what are we thinking about when we are hearing other large loads? And would this bill need to consider other large loads? Because right now it's so tailored to data centers. Do we need to think about other large loads that could impact our communities? Thanks.
Chair Lively, Representative Neron. In the other agreements that my colleague Ellen mentioned, they have applied to all new large loads. So all new large loads are subject to this multi-pillar framework that is essentially long-term contract, minimum payment, collateral. And other new large loads that we see, I do a lot of work in Arizona, and there we have electric vehicle manufacturing. In the South, there's a lot of battery manufacturing. There's also semiconductor manufacturing. So these are the new types of advanced manufacturing technologies that we're seeing come into a lot of states.
Thank you.
thank you. Okay, thank you very much for your testimony. So colleagues, we have one more hearing. We have very limited time left to do that hearing. So at this point, any of those others that wishing to testify in this, I encourage you to submit your testimony online, which you can do for 48 hours after we started this particular hearing. And then I'm going to close the hearing on 3546.